There is a chunk of concrete in a laboratory in Bergamo, Italy, that most materials scientists would walk past without a second glance. It is grey, rough, unremarkable. It was pulled from the seabed off the coast of Tuscany in 2003, drilled from a Roman harbour wall that had been standing in open saltwater for over 2,000 years. I first came across it in a footnote of a geological survey I was reading for an entirely different project. The footnote mentioned something that stopped me cold. The concrete was not merely surviving in the sea. It was, according to laboratory analysis, measurably stronger than the day it was poured. Not preserved, not holding up, stronger. The Romans built it before the birth of Christ, and it has been improving ever since. Modern concrete, by comparison, begins to fail within decades. The formula that made this possible was practiced across an empire, documented in at least 2 surviving ancient texts, and then lost for 1,500 years. I wanted to understand how that was possible. I found it because I was looking for something else entirely. But once I saw that footnote, I could not leave it alone. So I went back to the beginning. The Romans called it opus caementitium, though the word concrete does justice to neither the material nor the method. It began in the volcanic fields west of Naples, in a region the Romans called Campi Flegrei, the burning fields. The earth there produces 8 ash, pale and calcium-rich, that the Romans named after the nearby town of Puteoli. We know it as pozzolana. When this ash is mixed with lime and seawater, something remarkable occurs. A chemical reaction binds the calcium, silica, and aluminium into a matrix that does not merely harden. It bonds at the molecular level, and it continues bonding for centuries. The Roman architect Vitruvius, writing around 30 BCE, recorded the ratios with the specificity of a man who understood that getting them wrong meant buildings that killed people. 1 part lime to 3 parts pozzolana for land structures. 1 part lime to 2 parts pozzolana for anything that would meet water. He noted that this mixture, when submerged, became a single stone mass that the sea itself could not dissolve. Pliny the Elder, writing a century later, went further. He observed that the harbour concrete at Puteoli grew harder with each passing year, becoming, in his words, every day stronger against the waves. For most of the history of scholarship on Roman building, that line was treated as poetic exaggeration. I will return to Pliny shortly, because he was not exaggerating. The scale on which the Romans deployed this material is difficult to overstate. The Pantheon in Rome, completed around 125 CE under Hadrian, remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built. It spans 43.3 metres. It weighs approximately 5,000 tonnes. The builders varied the aggregate by elevation, using heavy basalt near the base and light pumice near the oculus, a grading technique that modern engineers did not fully appreciate until the dome was surveyed with modern instruments. It has stood for nearly 1,900 years without steel reinforcement, without expansion joints, without any of the structural interventions we consider essential today. But the Pantheon, extraordinary as it is, was not the most ambitious application of Roman concrete. That distinction belongs to the harbour at Caesarea Maritima on the coast of modern Israel. Between roughly 23 and 10 BCE, Herod the Great ordered a massive artificial harbour built on an exposed coastline with no natural shelter. The engineering solution required pouring concrete directly into the open sea. Pozzolana was quarried near Naples, loaded onto ships, and transported across the entire eastern Mediterranean to a construction site in Palestine. Trace element analysis of drill cores taken from the Caesarea harbour walls in the early 2000s confirmed that the volcanic ash did not come from any local source. It came from Campi Flegrei, over 2,000 kilometres away. The Romans shipped their critical ingredient across the sea because no local substitute would do. That fact alone tells us something about the sophistication of the supply chain that held this technology together. I want to be careful about what I am claiming here. I am not suggesting the Romans understood the chemistry of what they were making. They did not know about aluminium tobermorite or philipsite. They did not have a theory of pozzolanic reaction. What they had was something more fragile and, in some ways, more impressive. They had a living tradition of practice, passed through generations of builders and labourers who knew what the mixture should look like, how it should feel, how long to let the lime calcine when the paste was ready to pour. The knowledge was in the hands as much as in any text. And then, for roughly 14 centuries, no one on earth made anything like it. Portland cement was not patented until 1824. Everything I have described so far is remarkable, but it is not the part that kept me awake. Now consider what happened next. Here is where the story becomes uncomfortable because we did not simply forget this material. We failed to transmit it, and the distinction matters. The texts survived. Vitruvius survived. Pliny survived. The recipes were copied by medieval scribes who preserved them alongside treatises on geometry and astronomy. The information was never lost. What was lost was the capacity to act on it. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed, it did not take the libraries first. It took the trade routes, it took the quarries, it took the ships that carried pozzolana from Naples to Palestine. It severed the apprenticeship chains that connected a master builder in Rome to a labourer at Caesarea. The knowledge was not destroyed, it was orphaned. What use is a recipe if no living person knows how the mixture should feel between their fingers? The record does not support the comfortable version of this story, the one where we simply got better at building over time. In 2002, a research program called ROMACONS began the most systematic study of Roman marine concrete ever attempted. Over 7 years, the team drilled 36 cores from 12 harbour and pier sites across the Mediterranean, from Italy to Israel to Egypt. I have spent a considerable amount of time with the published reports from this program, and what they describe is not what I expected. The cores from Italian sites, particularly those near the Bay of Naples where pozzolana was local and plentiful, showed dense, well-mixed concrete with remarkably few voids. The cores from Caesarea, by contrast, show evidence of poor mixing, of air pockets, of workers who were clearly struggling with unfamiliar materials, far from the source of their key ingredient. I find this telling. It suggests that even within the Roman system, at the height of its logistical power, the quality of the concrete depended on the proximity of skilled hands to familiar materials. Ship the ash across the sea, and the product suffered. The system worked, but it worked within limits that were tightly bound to human skill and local knowledge. The real breakthrough in understanding came in 2017, when Marie Jackson, a geologist at the University of Utah, published findings in the journal American Mineralogist that transformed the field. Jackson had been studying the ROMACONS cores using synchrotron radiation at the Advanced Light Source in Berkeley, California. What she found inside the 2,000-year-old concrete was a mineral called aluminium tobermorite, intergrown with a related mineral called philipsite. These minerals had formed within the concrete matrix itself, growing slowly in the spaces between grains of volcanic ash as seawater percolated through the structure over centuries. I keep trying to convey the significance of this finding without resorting to the kind of language I have promised to avoid. Aluminium tobermorite is a mineral that modern materials scientists have been trying to synthesize in laboratory conditions for decades. The process requires precise temperatures, pressures, and chemical environments that are extremely difficult to maintain. The Romans produced it by mixing volcanic ash with lime and seawater using their hands. The mineral grew on its own, strengthening the concrete from within, decade after decade, century after century. Pliny was not exaggerating. The concrete genuinely was growing stronger every day. 6 years later, in January 2023, a team led by Admir Masic at MIT published a study in Science Advances that added another layer. Masic's group examined lime clasts, small white chunks of calcium that appear throughout Roman concrete and were long dismissed as evidence of sloppy mixing. What Masic found was the opposite. The lime clasts were deliberately incorporated through a technique he called hot mixing, in which quicklime was combined with pozzolana before it had fully slight. These clasts acted as internal reservoirs. When cracks formed in the concrete, rainwater or seawater would dissolve the lime, which then recrystallized in the crack, sealing it. The concrete was not merely strong, it was, in a meaningful sense, self-healing. Then in 2025, a team working at the Pompeii excavation site published confirmation in Nature Communications. At the Regio 9 site, archaeologists had uncovered what appeared to be a renovation project abandoned in mid-pour when Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. The raw materials were still laid out: piles of pozzolana, buckets of calciumite, mixing surfaces. The hot mixing technique Masic had proposed was visible in the arrangement of the workspace itself. How do we account for a civilization that produced, by accident of practice, a molecular result that our most advanced laboratories still cannot reliably replicate? I want to set that question against the modern context briefly. Portland cement, the basis of virtually all modern concrete, is responsible for approximately 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. The American Society of Civil Engineers has given United States infrastructure a grade of D+. We spend trillions of dollars repairing and replacing concrete structures that begin degrading within 50 years. The Roman harbour at Caesarea has been submerged in corrosive salt water for 2 millennia and is measurably stronger than the day it was poured. I am not romanticizing the past. I am reading the published data, and the comparison is not kind to us. Go back to the harbour. Go back to the scaffolding above the water at Caesarea. It is sometime around 15 BCE. A man stands on a wooden platform above the Mediterranean, and the sea is pulling at the scaffolding beneath his feet. He is not Roman. He is likely a conscripted labourer from the local population, one of hundreds working on Herod's harbour under Roman supervision. He is packing mortar into submerged wooden formwork, pressing it down with his hands and with flat wooden tools that will not survive the century. The volcanic ash he is working with came on a ship from a place he has never seen, a bay that smells of sulphur on the far side of the sea. He learned this work from a Roman overseer who learned it from another overseer who learned it in the yards at Puteoli, where this paste was first perfected. The heat is what he notices. When the pozzolana meets the seawater, the chemical reaction produces warmth that rises through the mortar and into his palms. He does not know the word for pozzolanic reaction. He does not know that the calcium and aluminium and silica are binding into a matrix that will outlast every empire he has ever heard of. He knows only that this grey paste, when it meets the sea, turns to stone, that it must be packed firmly, that the ratio matters, that if the mix is wrong, the formwork will crack and the sea will take everything. His name was not recorded. The names of the overseers were not recorded either. The name of the king who ordered the harbour was recorded by Josephus, the historian, who described the construction as one of the great engineering feats of the age. But the hands that did the work remain anonymous. Their knowledge would outlast every emperor whose name was carved in marble, but only in the structure itself, not in any living memory. Now go forward. Go to Pompeii, to the Regio 9 site, to that renovation project frozen in volcanic ash. Someone arranged those piles of raw materials carefully. Someone measured out the calcium, positioned the mixing surfaces, laid the tools within reach. That person stepped away, perhaps for water, perhaps to rest, and never came back. The arrangement of those materials is the last physical record of a living practice that would not be understood again for nearly 2,000 years. The question I keep returning to is not about Rome. Knowledge is not a document. It is not a formula copied onto parchment or stored in a digital archive. It is a living practice carried in hands and institutions, in the chain of one person showing another person how the mixture should feel, how the heat should rise when the paste is ready. We did not lose Roman concrete because someone burned the formula. We lost it because the world that practiced it came apart, and no one thought to ask the workers what they knew before they were gone. The concrete is still growing stronger beneath the Mediterranean. The workers who made it are still unnamed. The formula was never truly secret. It was simply alive, and then it was not.